Welcome back to Deep Dive. My name is Ben Smith, and it's my honor to be here with Pastor Shawn Scarborough, lead pastor of Family Worship Center in Lakeland, Florida. Our goal for these conversations is to dive deeper into the gospel of God as we unpack some key points from Pastor Shawn's Sunday messages. We hope this will be a catalyst for discipleship in your life and will lead to more conversations in your family, your friends, and in your small groups. Pastor Shawn, welcome.
Good to be here.
So, we're 4 weeks into this current series,
Yes.
Churchome. And it's cool the journey you've taken us on over these last 4 weeks. And you've really put a great deal of responsibility in the court of the church member.
Sure.
From the way that I've perceived it. And you're a pretty observant person while you're preaching. It's something that I'm working on. Like you know who's in their seat, who's not in their seat.
Yeah.
And I've heard you speak to the point of whether or not something lands or doesn't land, or the response of the church to a point you're making, or maybe to a scripture that you're highlighting. So my question is, to this point in this series, because of the responsibility that we have as husbands, as wives, as fathers, as mothers, as Christ followers, we have a great deal of responsibility.
Yeah.
Has this series landed to the point where you hope that it would have? Have you seen the response that you've been hoping to see?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that any communicator feels like it lands as well as they would want it to, right? But overall, comparatively, I feel like on a relative scale that people are absorbing what, is being asked of them. At the end of the day, people know it. People feel the responsibility. A lot of times we look for somebody to give us an excuse to not lean into it.
Yeah.
And that's just not happening in this particular conversation. So I think people know.
Yeah. And it's like you said yesterday, when you preach, it's 50 minutes and it's fast. I would say you have probably about an hour and a half of content that you deliver in about 45, 50 minutes. And so then people are just taking it in and then they're wide-eyed afterwards. So it kind of leaves you thinking.
Yeah,
like, okay, all right, this is my responsibility. This is what I have to do.
I think people want it.
Yeah.
We want people to count on us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we like it.
I think there's a dichotomy there.
Yeah.
We want it. We want the purpose of it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we're not willing to gird up.
Oh, sure.
And
yes.
So I feel like, yes, that is true. We all dream about being the hero in the movie.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can be lacking in doing the things that will get us there.
Yeah. Well, perseverance and resilience, obviously, that's a big generational conversation.
Yeah.
So no doubt that can be a hindrance, but we're still leveraging that kind of deep human call towards that responsibility that we do all want. Yeah.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Last Sunday, you talked about the altar in the temple courtyard and related it to the future end times, where plans for the rebuild of the temple will happen.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I did a 5-week study abroad program in Israel. I had a great time. It was awesome. And they took us to this place right adjacent to the Temple Mount and showed us this massive menorah.
Yeah.
Like it was probably 6 feet tall. And it was encased. And they told us that there's future plans to put this menorah in the future temple. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that and they said that, it was like the book of Revelation became very real to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, snap. Like, there's already conversations.
Yeah.
And this was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was very, I don't know. It was very sombering to think about. Like, that we're already moving in this direction.
Yeah.
And just to quote a few scriptures, we're to hasten the coming of the Lord, be expecting like the watchman on the tower. He will come back like a thief in the night. And generation after generation, as generations go by, the next generation dies off and still no rapture. I know that 2 Peter 3:9 says the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. So it's God's mercy, as I perceive it, that he hasn't come back yet, to give people more time to reach that level of repentance. And obviously more babies are being born, so there's more people populating the earth, so there's more opportunity there as well. But I can also see the expectation of the church waning. And I've heard you mention this on a Sunday before, this idea, you grow up your whole life in church, and Jesus coming back, Jesus coming back, Jesus coming back, and then you're 20 and 30 and then 50 and then 70 and then 80 and then they die off. And so I guess what I'm trying to fish out of you is, where's the balance in the expectation of the coming of the Lord, of living in expectation like the watchman on the tower, hastening the coming of the Lord, but also too with a realistic perspective of we have daily responsibilities to live out. Because I don't know if you've been asked this question. I've been asked the question, or I've asked the question before just in conversation, like if you knew Jesus was going to come back in 24 hours, like how would you live your life from there to now? Obviously, I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't sleep a wink, and I'd be calling up, visiting as many people as I possibly could. But that's not realistic to do, not knowing that Jesus isn't coming back tomorrow. So where's that balance, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a multifaceted question. One, like, I wouldn't sleep 24 hours. There would be people that I would, like, really lean heavy into, hey, this is going to happen as in 24 hours. You need to get to that. I think if we keep that expectation to some degree, everybody who gets saved, Jesus comes to, right? So there is that immediacy of you receive him. That's what salvation is. The Spirit of God dwells in you. And their lives are infinitely better even here once Jesus comes to them, right? So that, I think there's a hastening there, getting people ready for his coming. But there's also we have the Old Testament where when they were in Babylon, they were told, look, buy houses, build companies, get married, give your children in marriage, and live and prosper in the land. So hastening and or expecting the coming of the Lord is not in conflict with succeeding in life. So I think if we hold both of those realities, we can be desiring for him to come, but at the same time realizing this is an incomplete life. So as hard as I'm living it here, and as much as I want things to go well, they're never going to be as well as when he comes. So I can hold both. I'm expecting his coming. I want his coming when death is no more. I mean, there are promises on the other side of his coming that are far better than the life. No matter how good the life is here, that's so much better. So I think we can have both. And
I know we talked about on here before, I remember asking, like, is it okay to desire that the Lord hold off a little bit so that we can see a little bit more of life unfold? But that is a great point to speak to both ends of the spectrum of succeeding and prospering where we are with what we have, but then also too desiring the coming of the Lord, because it's going to be incredible.
Absolutely,
it's going to be a great day. So in talking about water baptism, you mentioned we see it in the Old Testament as well as the New. I take it's not as explicit in the same way as in the New, but maybe more symbolically. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so referring to the brazen laver, or when they would give they'd make a sacrifice, and then they would cleanse, they'd wash up before they went on in. That's representative of what has become water baptism in the New Testament. We don't have any record of exactly what water baptism looked like under the Old Covenant. We have John's baptism, and it was called John's baptism. So there was the cleansing, the washing, if you will, that was representative of that. Did it not look like full immersion until John the Baptist? Maybe. But even in like the story of Naaman, where he's told to go wash in the River Jordan 7
times,
I think that absolutely you can see foreshadowing of water baptism.
The Lord uses water to demonstrate, to illustrate. It's not that the water actually cleansed him. It was his obedience to the word of the Lord to go do that. But he happened to use water to do that. Would you also relate Noah and the flood to kind of the same thing, like a purification?
God baptized the earth.
He did.
And what was unrighteous was washed away. And what was righteous was saved. So again, using water to demonstrate that. Okay. That clears things up for sure. So now let's talk about gifts. Let's get into serving, because that was all day yesterday, which was really good. You mentioned here at Family Worship Center, roughly 500 people served. Of the aggregate number of people that call FWC home, that's just over 7%, thereabouts. Why do you think there's such a deficit of serving in the church today? Do you think it's primarily in relation to the statistics you threw out of a decrease in chores per generation?
Do you think that's part of it? Do you think that's primarily the reason? Why are we experiencing such a deficit?
Yeah, I think it's all part and parcel, as we say. It's frequency, church attendance frequency has dropped. So people that go to church that would call themselves followers of Jesus, they attend less. Mm-hmm. So when they come, they want to get into a worship service, have that moment, and then we may not see them for another 4 weeks. When people came every week, they didn't mind giving up a service here and there. Now we have multiple services, so people don't have to give up. But you come one time and serve, and then stay for the other. It's a long day.
Yeah,
I get that. People have, they just don't have maybe the patience. To do that the way they used to do that. So that contributes. Yes, not serving at home, that contributes as well. You have broken households where kids one weekend are with their mom, the next weekend they're with their dad. That plays a role into it as well, because if it's maybe it's your on week, you might behave differently that weekend versus the other weekend. So it all plays a role to it. I also think that as churches, it's interesting because churches in the church world in general is getting smaller, but churches are getting bigger. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have bigger churches today than we've ever had.
Yeah.
You can have the perception everything is taken care of, because there's such a level of professionalism in a church this size that you can walk in because of maybe what the staff does or their immediate closest volunteers. You kind of miss your role, like it's not necessary. I think that plays a role. So mindset, habits, it's all of it.
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah, I remember growing up, which I grew up in a church, out in the country.
Yeah.
But growing up, everybody did the same thing every week, and I don't ever remember people complaining, I need a break, or I'm burned out.
Yeah.
Or everybody served in the same role. And we had one service, we didn't have multiple services, so there wasn't a rotation. But today you see, and we've talked about this, you see a rotation of people volunteering so that they can receive and also give, and then receive and then give. But it seemed like there was a day where you were able to give and receive simultaneously and not have to take a break on the sideline and, just receive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, we talk about the distractions or the burnout. Burnout's real. I mean, people take a lot of input, and we can say, well, it's their fault. Maybe, but that's not the point. We get a lot of, whether it's because of our devices or all the information our kids get, and then they download when they get home. We are constantly taking on pressure because we're hearing of all the things that are going on in people's lives that we used to not hear. And that does create sort of an overwhelming sense of existence. And when we come to church, man, we just want a refreshing.
Yeah.
And we don't think I have something to offer today. Like, we feel very depleted. That plays a role as well. That's the unfortunate part, because people have so much to offer. Like, what God has placed within us, it's no wonder that it seems like there is a concerted effort of the enemy to hold us back by not serving with our giftedness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard to pour out of an empty cup.
It is. Yeah. It is.
And would you agree with this, that it's okay to sit for a while? Like, if you are empty, to receive, and if restoration is needed, to be restored, to sit for a while, but you can't stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There comes a point where you have to, okay, I've received, I'm restored, if that's the case, or I'm renewed. Now it's time to move on.
And when people take a break, if they're just taking a break from serving, but they're not taking a break to sort of recalibrate their rhythm, normally they won't get back into serving. If the goal of my break is to create a rhythm that makes serving possible, then it's going to be effective. If the goal of my break is just to not serve, I could go months and I'm just as empty, because my rhythm is actually what's breaking me. The thing is, your serving isn't what's breaking you. No matter who the person is, they're being in the house of God, pouring out of their heart for the sake of someone else, is not breaking them. It's everything else around them. So if they can fix that stuff and reposition themselves, the serving is actually helpful.
That's one thing I appreciate about you. You're good at getting to the root cause. I remember you telling a story years ago during a message, about these two guys were by a bank, a river, and a baby floats by. You remember this story?
Right.
It's like, oh, there goes a baby. That's weird. And then another baby goes by. Oh, that's weird. Another baby goes. So then this guy starts pulling these babies out.
Yeah.
And this other guy just takes off going upstream. And he's like, hey, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to go find out who's throwing these babies in the water.
That's exactly right.
Instead of just putting a Band-Aid on
Yeah.
the issue, like getting to the root cause. And I think that's very insightful for people to hear, because I've heard that a lot within the church. A desire to take break or burnout, and we've seen it. We've probably all felt it. You know, like you said, it's real, but it's more in relation to everything that's going on around us, not just the idea of serving.
Yeah.
But also too, I've witnessed serving can be life-giving.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you do invest
Absolutely
in the day, on a Sunday, a Wednesday, you're putting into practice. I'm just as much fulfilled, and physically I'm probably tired.
Yeah.
But like spiritually, my heart is full, and I'm overjoyed, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a desire, is that everybody, would feel that.
Yeah.
As
100%.
You brought up a great point, that we should desire the gift that God has given us. We need to run in our lane and use that gift, not someone else's gift. And God chose the gift he put in us. We didn't choose that.
Yeah.
We don't get to choose. And that all the gifts are needed and equal in use.
Yep.
And I've seen this too, someone try to operate in a gift that's just not there. And you gave an illustration of that yesterday. Why does the church do this? Why are we jumping lanes?
Yeah, I don't think that's just a church issue. I think it's a society issue. I mean, how many times have we gone to a restaurant and the person that is supposed to greet us doesn't really greet us? Or someone serving doesn't really serve the table well. No doubt that person has a giftedness. That's just not it. I feel like we see that all the time.
Yeah, or they're in a gift of leadership within the company, and they're not gifted to lead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The place we do not see that is professional sports teams. It just doesn't. I mean, the quarterback is the quarterback, the running back is the running back. I don't care.
That is why sports make the best illustrations.
They all day, because there is a process for that person to get to that position at the highest level.
Yeah.
And it's not by fulfilling a role that's not theirs.
Yep.
And so there is, whether it's going from little league to college to the minor leagues to the major leagues, it's a process that works out where people are most gifted. And not just that they would become a professional, but where the role they fill on that professional team. So yeah, it's like in the outliers, the most, I guess, gifted business people, I would argue, are more gifted than ever before. The most gifted athletes are more gifted than ever before. But in the bell curve, we're just not necessarily seeing that because we're not taking the time. It doesn't seem like we're taking the time to really help coach people into their lane. Yeah. And I say that starts at home.
Yeah.
Like that's been kind of the point of this conversation, is some of the issues we're seeing in church today, they're just the issues that home is seeing amplified. Yeah. Because home has 4, 5, 6 people, church has 4, 5, 600 people. Yeah. Right. So as we are wanting to just nurture our babies and let them feel good, we're actually not always setting them up to win, because we're not helping them see, nope, it's not your thing. This is your thing. Let's try this. Oh, it wasn't. What's related to this that you're like, let's keep you moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you shared the story of your son.
Yeah.
And you prefaced it with like, hey, look, there is the 1 out of 10.
Oh yeah.
You know, that they wind up proving everybody wrong.
Yes.
And someone yesterday texted me about that very point.
Yeah.
And asked me, like, hey, this is what Pastor said, but I feel like sometimes there are occasions where there are the outliers. And I'm like, yeah, he said that.
Yeah, and absolutely.
He's like, oh, I guess I missed that.
Yeah, you got to dial in the whole time,
You made a point.
Right?
You're like, because I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to get caught on. So there's always the outliers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but generally speaking, if you have a mother and a father who's present in the home, they're going to know.
Yeah.
Typically, the 9 out of 10 times, 90%, you're going to know what your kid gravitates toward and what they're not, what
Absolutely.
they're good at and what they're not, and fanning that into flame, and discipling your child.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh man, I think you can see as the club ball kind of craze has come into being in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, there are parents that spend a lot of money trying to force their kids onto a particular team that they may not be gifted for. And so again, I'm not trying to just blame parents. Parent shaming is kind of a popular thing today.
Yeah.
But it does probably start at home.
Yeah. And then you have those outliers where the parents, do a great job, and then you might have one that goes rebellious or something for a season. Yeah, and
you have the story, and people like to use that one. Michael Jordan, arguably,
he's the 0.1%,
the greatest, and he got
0.01.
cut from his middle school or junior high team or something. I don't know. There's a story out there, and yes. At a certain, I'm not saying you cut the kid off when they're 10 and say, oh, you're never going to, but,
right.
Yep.
Pay attention. Are people disgruntled over the idea of serving or being a servant? Like, is that a demeaning term? Like, serving.
Oh, absolutely. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have changed the title to leadership, right? Like, we have leaders. It's bizarre. You take work teams or church teams, and everybody's a leader. So, yes, we do all lead in our position. That's true. But there are leaders, there are managers, there are there is a delineation to what we do, I feel like. So if there wasn't a problem with the title, I don't think we would be seeking to call everyone a leader.
Yeah, and what's interesting, though, that's in the church, but the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. And you brought up the scripture yesterday. He who desires to become the greatest must first become a servant.
Yep.
And Jesus is very explicit in that message that he preached, that we are called to serve. So how in the church have we gotten that flopped?
Yeah, that might just be a Western thing. I don't know that it's global.
Okay.
But I can't speak to that. But I think we've all seen it in the Western church. Not to just pick on the leadership podcasters, but at the end of the day, some of the largest church leadership podcasts are hosted by pastors who actually haven't been leading in the spiritual conversation for a decade, 2 decades. And yet they're telling us how to lead. And how they're telling us how to lead is make our bed in the morning, make sure we pray, make sure we prioritize self-care. Sure, we should take care of ourselves. But what about that prayer piece, that prophetic piece, that knowing this is a generational issue that we have to preach to, and we have to take darts from the community so that our people know how to live their lives, what to be prepared for? I don't see any of the guys that we kind of hail as great leaders who are having these conversations. I don't see them leading in the thing we're actually called to do.
Yeah.
Preach the word.
There's a lack of shepherding the people. And then you've said this too, there's a lack of apostleship.
Yeah, absolutely.
An overseeing of churches and someone who can, from 30,000 feet, speak into the local churches and kind of maybe bring a little bit of correction or get us back on a good path. And even pastors holding lead pastors who have fallen into that boat, holding them a little bit more accountable. Like, hey, these things you're saying are great, but don't neglect the other side of it as well, and actually shepherd your people.
Well, because here's the thing, anybody can tell us how to have a good morning routine.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to have a senior leader telling us how to have a good morning routine. We do need a senior leader to say, here's what's going on in our world, our culture, that is against the gospel, and we have to raise the standard. And they get poked. Like they're the ones that get criticized, not for watering down the gospel, but for being firm in the gospel. That's what we're not seeing today. So when you bring up apostles, whether you want to be an apostle or not, the people that have pastors listening to them, they're apostles.
Yeah.
They're filling that apostolic role. And if you look at the messages that the apostles and the prophets would give to the church, they were hard messages.
Yeah.
And yet the people that have been set up as apostles over us are giving us a very soft message comparatively.
Yeah.
And so God chose them.
Yeah.
They have that leadership influence. I'm not saying they shouldn't have it. They are gifted leaders. It's that they're not using that role to speak the message that, quite frankly, we need to be encouraged in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's some that have been serving and doing, yet they still can't pinpoint their spiritual gift. What do we say? Like, because and we say this in Welcome Home all the time. This idea, if you don't know your gift, one, pray and ask.
Yep.
Seek the Lord. 2, start somewhere.
Yeah.
Don't sit on the sidelines and wait for the Lord to tell you. There's always something to do in the house of the Lord. And then 3, we give them that little gifts assessment.
Yep.
That they can go on and maybe that can help point them in the right direction. What if people are checking those boxes and they're like, I still don't really know? Because there are some that have not been able to pinpoint.
Yeah, I'm probably a little more hard on that in just the sense that if you're doing it, it will emerge.
Yeah.
It's going to emerge. So if God has said each has received a gift, then they have a gift. So I have to go with first the word of God's going to prove true. But are they, now the process we make up. Everything you just said, I say, we're just kind of pulling that out of examples in the Bible of how it looks like people found their place. Like, when you look at a David who was just out in the field, and because he was out in the field and he attacked the lion, he attacked he had these moments where he found out, I'm a warrior. There's something here. Where did he find out that he was a warrior? Not fighting his brothers, but actually out in the field. So I feel like we have these examples, and the only ones we have, where gifts emerge. So if I know everybody has a gift, if they can't discern it spiritually, meaning through prayer and just asking, then I have to believe they're going to find it experientially because I know it's in there.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say if you're serving and you just started somewhere, whether that's your gift or not, you're adding value and you're receiving value. It's more blessed to give than to receive, right? Like that's a principle Jesus gave us. So I know they're giving and that's helpful. I know they're receiving and that's helpful. If they just don't like it, yes, try something else. But sometimes then you have to maybe do a more introspective conversation and say, am I just hard to please? Like, did I actually find it? I'm just not willing to say that's it because that's not the one I wanted. That would be a case by case.
Yeah. Is it a little bit more muddy to find a place for some with a specific gift to serve in the local church?
Possibly. Yeah, I think that's where now we have to get into place, because there are some people who their particular giftedness might not have a place where they are, and they may have to relocate to find the usefulness of their gift because it's not a fit there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that helps. That's good. In both service, well, hold on. Yeah. In both services, I saw people Googling the word exhort. So you were talking about exhortation.
Yes.
In both services, I saw people,
and
I'm kind of peering over,
right.
looking at. So
clearly I should have told him what the word means.
What does it mean?
Encourage.
Encourage.
Yeah.
Simply that.
Yeah.
Okay. So
reprove, rebuke, exhort. So when we look at it in terms of preaching or speaking a message, exhortation is more on the encouraging you to do something, or encouraging you in what you're doing, but it's a word of coaching, a word of encouragement. Even command could be in there, but not command as in I'm doing the wrong thing. So when we get into reproof or rebuke, I'm doing something wrong that I need to have corrected. Encouragement may be telling me to do something, but it's not telling me to do something in response to me doing something wrong. It's just saying, hey, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So is preaching a spiritual gift, or is it a combo of teaching and exhortation?
Oh, yeah. Well, great question. We're all called to preach. So we have used that word, like when Paul uses it to say, preach the word, communicate the word.
Yeah.
Yes, that's reprove, rebuke, exhort. It's any one of all of them that would be considered preaching. But we're also all preachers of the gospel, meaning the congregation. But not everybody's called to teach, where we would understand the gospel at a deeper level for the purpose of communicating that to someone else.
Okay.
And being responsible for what we're communicating, right? Like we're accountable for the things that we say. It's why James said not many of you should even want to be teachers because there's greater accountability on the other side. Yeah.
We'll be judged with greater strictness.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is daunting.
Oh, for sure.
But I've also come to learn in my own experience, if the call is there, you better gird up and do it.
Well, it's why when you say the amen at the end of the sermon and you go home, it's not like, it's a very,
absolutely.
You feel different when you go home.
Yeah.
Because you want to know that you have adequately, correctly communicated the gospel. Yeah. It's not my words.
Yeah.
That's
why it's important. So, I mean, you've brought this up before, but the letters of Paul to Timothy are directed to someone who is a pastor.
Absolutely.
Someone in that type of leadership role.
Yep.
And sometimes we like to cherry pick stuff out and we like to broadband it to the whole.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly appropriate because he was writing to a pastor.
For sure. There are principles.
Yeah. There are principles. Yeah.
Yes, which is what you're saying we do.
Yeah.
But overall, that was a letter to a pastor.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess in my mind, because you don't see preaching necessarily in the Romans 12 list or the 1 Corinthians 12 list.
Yep.
But
yeah, you see teacher in both.
Teacher in both. Yep. Yeah. So as far as spiritual gifts are concerned, that's really the spiritual gift there is teaching.
Yeah. If our modern context of what we would call a preacher is probably we mean exhortation. That's probably what we mean.
Okay.
There are lead pastors who exhort. Like when Paul said, I didn't preach anything except Jesus and him crucified. Yeah. He was exhorting the Corinthian church. That's what he was doing. Now, he would later go on and teach them. But at the beginning, it was, these are the commands. This is who Jesus is.
I would respectfully disagree with you a little bit from yesterday that you don't have the gift of exhortation, is what you said.
Yeah, for sure.
I would say that it is there because you come up on the back end of worship and usually there's a moment of exhortation there, typically from Sunday to Sunday, and people respond to it. They lift hands, they shout, we go back into worship. Yep. And then, yes, your messages are very dense and filled with a lot of information.
Yep.
But at the same time, usually, sometimes it primarily is informative, but then usually, as is the case, we're inspired to do something.
Yeah.
Would you not say that is exhortation within the context of teaching?
Yes, but I wouldn't, and that's why I would say all of us move in a measure of these gifts, but there will be one we're just better at than others. Like, take Dad, for instance, which I brought him up. He can do he can come up with nothing. You could just call him on stage and because he's gifted at exhortation, could just for 35 minutes preach the gospel and people would respond because he's gifted to do that. Yet he's the one that'll tell you there are certain services of the year he doesn't enjoy when he was pastoring because they were much more teaching focused.
Yeah.
He can teach,
but
he wouldn't call himself a gifted teacher. Yes, there are times that because I'm in a position in the local church as the lead pastor on stage in front of people, that God will pull out an exhortation for their sake, but I wouldn't say that's my giftedness. So do I do it? Yes. But take yesterday, for instance, where after communion, then after another worship song, there was the place for exhortation leading into the offering, and you came out and did that. So I didn't have to do that. It's not my giftedness to do. Someone else can do it, and it will actually be just as good or better than when God moves through somebody that maybe isn't gifted to do that. So I do get in trouble a little bit. Sometimes I say I'm not this, I'm not that. I say it for people's benefit to just help them locate that I'm focused on one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't limit God.
I got you. Yeah.
And I hear you. Yes.
I think I'm gonna still stick on my side of the fence about
That's
that.
fine.
I feel like
yes.
I feel like you got that in you. You talked about false prophecy during the 2020 election.
Yeah.
During the first service, you talked about, both services, you talked about how not all who prophesy falsely they're not necessarily false prophets.
Yeah.
They just in that moment got out of bounds. And then,
Yeah.
of course, there are false prophets. Is this why internationally there's little recognition in the church of the office of a prophet?
Probably.
Because the Ephesians 4, the fivefold ministry,
Yeah.
we see most of these fulfilled. What we don't see a lot is the title of apostle, which we talked about. Even though people are fulfilling that role, they just don't have that title.
Yep.
Or they have that role, they're not fulfilling it correctly, and they don't have the title. But then prophet as well, I'd say, is the other one that is we just don't see.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because if you go to Corinthians, when he says first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then you go to the Corinthian or the Ephesians list. So that's the Romans list. The Ephesians list, he lists them all in order: apostle, prophet. But then he says evangelist, pastor, teacher. So teacher is third in the Corinthians list, last in the Ephesians list, which just tells me that those three gifts are they're parallel. That's a sort of a flat hierarchy between evangelist, pastor, teacher. So all three of those work in concert in that local church level. But above that is apostle, prophet. I don't think people want that. I don't think they want that judgment, right? And that's what I was saying earlier. Whether somebody wants it or not, or calls themselves that, we're affiliated with the Assemblies of God. So with Doug Clay, who's the superintendent, there better be apostolic giftedness in him if he's literally leading this many churches.
Yeah.
Is that phraseology used?
Which I think is like 13,000.
Yes.
Assembly of God churches in the United States.
Yeah. So is that apostolic? For sure.
Yeah.
You take a guy like Craig Rochelle. He's leading thousands of pastors, or Chris Hodges, thousands of pastors. Those are apostolic roles. So those guys are responsible for spending time in prayer at a level that they recognize, oh, this is what's coming against the church right now, so we need to have our guard up. This is opportunity in culture right now, so we need to lean into this. And that just sort of gives us that higher view and understanding of what's kind of coming against us or for us on the ground. Because you know, as well as I do at a local church level, you're dealing with individuals, and that can become very consuming, where you don't necessarily pick your head up all the time to see what's happening in the world. I know what's happening in their lives, but maybe not what's in the world. So we rely on apostolic ministry for that. Prophetic ministry, where somebody says, hey, this is coming against us, be on guard. That's what you see in prophetic ministry in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was among the prophets who would come up from Jerusalem and they would go to Antioch or whatever. Agabus was one of them. Yeah. And they talked about there's a famine coming on the land. That's a prophetic message. That's your local pastor. I'm not going to get that. Yeah. But when somebody says, hey, there's a famine in the land coming, if that's somebody I trust, then we're going to adjust and speak that message into our congregation so they can prepare.
See, I think that's interesting, because if someone were to say that today, I'd be like,
that's exactly right.
We'll see about that. You know?
I remember 2007 like it was yesterday, so you guys are all too young for that. But people that were prophetic voices when we were coming into a recession, so we're on the early side of it. I don't even know that you had to be a prophet to see it, because economic forecasters were all over it. Yeah. But the prophets in our particular movement were all saying there's no recession in heaven. God's got a full supply. And we watched people in churches all over speculate, over invest, and lost a lot during those years of what was called the Great Recession, because they were told by the prophetic voices, there's no recession in heaven. Same voices in 2020, this is going to happen in an election. That didn't happen. So I think we have irresponsible prophets. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So even when someone does prophesy today, it's like, the hairs on our neck are standing up. Like, there's a great deal of doubt.
Well, that's why Paul said, despise not prophecy. That's what he's saying in Thessalonians. You're going to come to a point you doubt this. Don't doubt it. Like, you might need to make sure you have the right people, but don't give up on prophecy.
Yeah, don't give up on it.
And I think that's our message today. Maybe we've seen it abused, but don't give up on prophecy.
Yeah.
We're going to need this.
Yeah, or even, yes, even if someone entitles themselves, they say I'm a prophet, the hairs are standing up on the back of my neck.
I get it.
And I think it's because of the trends that we were talking about, the abuse of prophecy over the last several decades. And it not being a very reliable source of futuristic events and what the Lord is doing in the earth. I guess there are some that are getting it right, but I think systemically we're not seeing it. And that makes it hard. Yeah.
For sure.
So I'm curious to see if that office will ever again emerge to where it is trusted. However, when we look at like Old Testament prophets, everybody hated them.
Absolutely.
Because they would speak hard truths. If you don't correct and get, so I don't know. Was there a season where it was trusted, or has it always just been like they've always hated the prophets?
Yeah, I think they've always hated the prophets, but I think they could trust them too. Meaning, if they said famine's coming, that's why they hated them, because they knew famine was coming. Yeah.
Well, and in the case of Nathan, he was respected. Daniel, respected.
For sure.
Joseph, respected. These guys that the Lord would reveal to them things that were coming or things that would happen or an interpretation of a dream. And people did respond well to them. They're like, ooh, we better.
Well, like you bring up Joseph, I mean, that was the interpretation. You're going to have 7 good years, and then you're going to have 7 bad years. We wouldn't want to hear that today. So some of the probably more, I'm going to use the word legitimate, maybe accurate, prophets are, maybe we hold them down because we don't elevate them because we don't like their message. And the ones we like their message, we elevate them. It can be on us a little too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Well, yeah, I would absolutely put it on us.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. It just creates confusion.
But finding those who are really dialed in, it's harder. It's harder today.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Yep.
All right. I think I got one more here. I don't know, 2. Do we find gifts or specifications of gifts outside of these 2 lists, Romans 12?
Yeah, I don't think they're exhaustive.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's the heart of it, the spirit of it. I think we could take any gift outside of that and probably attach it to one of those. Like if you go back, like these are all at the will of the Spirit. I mean, if we went into 1 Corinthians 12 and it talked about spiritual things and then manifestations of the Spirit, there are varieties of gifts, varieties of service, varieties of activities. All of those haven't all been flushed out in these texts. Going back to Isaiah when he said, would rest upon Jesus the full measure of the Spirit, spirit of wisdom and counsel, knowledge, fear of the Lord. Like
the full measure of the Spirit. I don't know that we could exactly classify everything that is.
Right. Well, like that's my point. So you see, like in the menorah, you brought the menorah. There are 7 candles. You go to the throne of God. We see in Revelation 7 burning torches. In Isaiah, 7 spirits of God, if you will. The Spirit of God being that center, and then there being 6 kind of defined pieces there. From that, then we have 9 manifestations in Corinthians, 7 in Romans. Well, we went from the Spirit of the Lord to 7 to 16. So I feel like there are gifts that we would say, oh, this is a gift that's not listed. But if we were pretty creative, we could probably fit it in something.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes sense. How many spiritual gifts can someone have? Can they have multiple?
Ooh, yeah, I think so. I don't think there's a limit. Other than we're not going to have all of them.
Right.
So I guess let me walk that back. There is a limit, but is that 2, 3? And I will say this, and it can be confusing. I think somebody can not have a particular spiritual gift, but in a moment, the person in front of them needs a gift.
Yeah.
And that's all God has.
Yeah.
And man,
absolutely.
He'll flow through you.
Absolutely.
You may not have a gift of healing, but He healed through you for their sake.
Yeah.
So, we have to be considerate of that and cautious. Like just because I did that doesn't mean that that's a gift. But yeah, I think people can have multiple gifts.
Yeah, outside of that context
Yeah.
of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon you in that moment, to do something.
Yeah.
Even though you don't have a particular gift, just generally speaking, like, I have this gift, or I have this gift, I have this gift. Because, like, again, my ears perk up when someone, they list 5 or 6 or 4 or 5, and I'm thinking, like, that's kind of a lot,
Yeah, let somebody else have a chance.
To hone in on, to specifically hone in and be focused on what it is that you actually have. Yeah,
Yes.
I feel like, again, like, not to put a limit on it, I feel like if someone lists more than 2 or 3, then I'm cautious. If it's 2 or 3 or 1 or 2, then it's more believable if I'm listening to that.
Yeah. Yes. I get that.
What are your spiritual gifts?
Yeah, I think teaching is a spiritual gift.
Yeah.
And not because I'm a great communicator,
You
just
are a great
because
communicator.
being in the Word, you ask questions that maybe other people don't ask, and it allows you to see things through revelation for the purpose of communicating. So I think content precedes communication. So as that, I feel like there is depth that is seen in the Word that I have to make sure communication doesn't get in the way. So I think teaching is a gift.
That's a good point.
I don't know that I have another gift. I have to lead. So I feel like you brought up exhort. As the pastor of this church, I have to lead this church. So in this office, I believe God works through me in that way. In navigating a service, he's worked through me in exhortation, even prophecy at times, but just because of the office. As an individual, when I'm 75 years old and retired from church leadership, I'll still be teaching the gospel, but I won't be leading something, and I won't be exhorting.
Okay.
So that's the gift that's sticky.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can go back to when I was 12 years old and I was doing puppets. I'm teaching the gospel. I just had a puppet in my hand for children's church. Yeah. Right? So it's always been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yep.
Well, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it poured outside for a little bit.
Oh, it's coming down.
It's coming down. But that's all I have for today. Is there anything you would like to add on the back end of this conversation?
We have 1 week to go.
1 week to go. Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious about that.
1 week to go.
Very cool. So make sure you guys are here this coming Sunday. We have 2 services, 9 and 11. It's going to be the end cap of the series we've been in, Churchome. So you don't want to miss it. And we'll see you next time on Deep Dive.